The fluorescent lights of the Maple Leaf Diner hummed their familiar goodbye as Elena Vasquez wiped down the last booth of her shift. It was nearly midnight, and the cold October air had kept customers scarce for most of the evening. She counted her tips in the back room, $17.43, barely enough to cover groceries for the next few days. Elena didn't complain. She had stopped complaining years ago, when her mother passed and left her alone in this small apartment in this rough neighborhood on the outskirts of the city. She had learned that life was simply a matter of putting one foot in front of the other, of showing up when she was supposed to, of being kind even when the world gave her few reasons to be. She pulled her thin jacket tighter around her shoulders and stepped out into the night. The street was quiet in that particular way that made Elena walk a little faster. The lampposts cast pools of yellow light at uneven intervals, leaving stretches of shadow between them. She knew this route by heart, past the closed pawn shop, around the corner by the old laundromat, and then 3 more blocks to her building. She was thinking about whether she had enough rice at home when she saw him. At first, she thought it was a pile of discarded clothes. People dumped things in this neighborhood all the time. But as she drew closer, her heart began to beat differently. The shape was too defined. The stillness was too complete. It was a boy. Elena rushed forward, her worn sneakers scuffing against the pavement. He couldn't have been more than 12 or 13 years old, lying on his side with one arm outstretched as if he had been reaching for something before he fell. His face was pale, unnaturally pale, and his dark hair fell across his forehead in a way that made him look younger, more fragile. "Hey," she said softly, kneeling beside him. "Can you hear me?" No response. She touched his shoulder gently, and a small gasp escaped her lips. His skin was cold, but not the cold of someone who had been lying outside for hours. It was a different kind of cold, one she couldn't quite understand. Elena looked around, hoping to see someone who could help, but the street was empty. She pulled out her phone with trembling hands, ready to call an ambulance, when she noticed something that made her pause. The boy's clothes. They weren't ordinary clothes. His jacket was made of a material that caught the faint lamplight like silk, and the buttons looked like real silver. His shoes were polished leather, the kind she had only ever seen in store windows she walked past without entering. And on the left side of his jacket there was an emblem, a crest made of silver thread, depicting what looked like a crescent moon wrapped around a single rose. This boy did not belong here. Eleanor's instincts told her something was very wrong. Not just the unconscious child on the street, but something deeper, something she couldn't name. Still, she couldn't leave him. Whatever had happened, whatever strange circumstances had brought this wealthy child to her neighborhood, he was still just a boy. And he needed help. She checked his pockets carefully, looking for identification. In the inside pocket of his jacket, her fingers found a phone, slim, elegant, and still warm as if it had been recently used. The screen lit up at her touch, showing no lock code, and she saw the call log. There was only one contact saved in the entire phone. Farther. Elena hesitated. She didn't know what she was getting herself into. But the boy's breathing was shallow, and she didn't know how much time he had. She pressed the number and held the phone to her ear. It rang once, twice. Then a voice answered, deep, measured, and carrying an authority that made Eleanor's breath catch in her throat. Adrian. The single word was spoken like a statement and a question at once. Eleanor swallowed hard. I'm sorry, she said, her voice coming out smaller than she intended. This isn't Adrian. My name is Eleanor. I'm a waitress. I just finished my shift and I found a boy lying unconscious on the street. I found this phone in his pocket. There was silence on the other end. Not the silence of confusion, but the silence of something vast and powerful becoming very still. Describe him, the voice said. He's young, maybe 12 or 13. Dark hair. Very pale. He's wearing expensive clothes, and there's a silver crest on his jacket. A moon and a rose. The silence stretched longer this time. Eleanor could hear her own heartbeat pounding in her ears. Then the man spoke again, and his voice had changed. It was still deep, still powerful, but there was something else beneath it now. Something that sounded almost like fear. Is he breathing? Yes, Eleanor said quickly. But it's shallow. I don't know what's wrong with him. Where are you? She gave him the street name and the nearest cross street, her words tumbling out in a rush. Stay with him, the man said. Do not let anyone touch him. Do not let anyone take him. I'm coming. Should I call an ambulance? Eleanor asked. No. No ambulance. No hospitals. Just stay with him and keep him safe. The call ended. Eleanor stared at the phone for a moment, her mind racing with questions she couldn't answer. Then she looked down at the boy's face, at his closed eyes and his two still features, and she made a decision. She would stay. She didn't know who this man was. She didn't know why he didn't want an ambulance or what kind of trouble this boy might be in. But she knew what it felt like to be alone and vulnerable, to have no one coming to help. She wouldn't leave this child to face whatever was coming without someone by his side. Eleanor sat down on the cold pavement beside him, pulling his head gently onto her lap to keep it off the rough concrete. She took off her thin jacket and draped it over his chest, even though she knew it would do little good. The night air bit at her bare arms, but she didn't move. It's okay, she whispered to him, though she wasn't sure if he could hear her. Someone's coming for you. Just hold on. The cars arrived 7 minutes later. Eleanor had never seen anything like them. 3 black vehicles, sleek and powerful, with windows so dark they seemed to absorb the light around them. They moved silently down the street and stopped in perfect formation, blocking both ends of the block. Doors opened, and figures emerged. They were tall, all of them, and they moved with a grace that seemed almost unnatural. Men and women in dark coats, their faces composed and watchful. They spread out around the street without a word, forming a perimeter that Eleanor hadn't realized she was now inside of. Then the last door opened, and he stepped out. Eleanor knew immediately that this was the man she had spoken to her. Not because of how he was dressed, though his clothes spoke of wealth beyond anything she had imagined. Not because of how the others deferred to him, moving aside as he walked. It was something in the way he carried himself, a weight of authority so profound that it seemed to change the very air around him. He was tall, with dark hair that fell just past his shoulders and eyes that seemed to hold centuries of wisdom and sorrow. His face was striking, angular, and pale, and his gaze found Eleanor's across the distance with an intensity that made her want to look away. But she didn't look away. She stayed where she was, the boy's head still resting on her lap, and she met those ancient eyes with her own tired, determined ones. The man walked toward her, his footsteps silent on the pavement. When he reached her, he knelt down, and for a moment, all that authority, all that power, seemed to fall away. He was just a farther looking at his child. "Adrian," he breathed, reaching out to touch the boy's face. Eleanor watched as his fingers brushed across the boy's forehead with impossible gentleness. She saw the way his jaw tightened, the way his eyes flickered with an emotion that was almost too raw to witness. "What happened to him?" he asked, and though his voice was quiet, Eleanor heard the undercurrent of something vast beneath it. "I don't know," she said honestly. "I found him like this. I didn't see anyone else around." The man closed his eyes for a moment, and Eleanor could see him gathering himself, pulling that mantle of authority back into place. When he opened them again, he looked at her directly. "You stayed with him." "Of course I did." The words came out before Eleanor could think about them. "He's just a boy. I wasn't going to leave him alone." Something shifted in the man's expression. It was subtle, just a slight softening around his eyes, but Eleanor noticed it. "Most people would have walked away," he said. "Most people would have been afraid." Eleanor thought about this. She was afraid, she realized. Her heart was still pounding, and her hands were still trembling. But fear had never been a good enough reason to abandon someone who needed help. "I've been afraid most of my life," as she said quietly. "It doesn't change what's right." The man studied her for a long moment. Then he nodded, and something that might have been respect entered his gaze. "Marcus," he said, not raising his voice, and one of the men from the cars stepped forward. "Take Adrian to the car. Carefully." The man called Marcus moved with swift efficiency, lifting the boy from Eleanor's lap as if he weighed nothing at all. Eleanor watched as he carried Adrian to one of the vehicles, and she felt a strange pang of loss at the absence of that small, cold weight. She started to stand, assuming that this was the end of her part in whatever strange story she had stumbled into. But the man's voice stopped her. "Wait." Eleanor turned back to find him still kneeling on the pavement, his eyes never having left her face. "You've seen things tonight that you shouldn't have seen," he said. You've stepped into a world that exists alongside yours but separate from it. There are those among my people who would say you've become a risk. A loose end that needs to be addressed. Eleanor's blood ran cold, but she forced herself to stand straight. Are you threatening me? No. The word was simple and absolute. I'm explaining the situation. Because you deserve to understand what happens next. He rose to his feet in one fluid motion, and Eleanor had to tilt her head back to look at him. My name is Lord Aldrich Morganthair, he said. I am the ruler of a nation hidden within the shadows of your world. My son was attacked tonight by forces that wish to see my family destroyed. You found him. You protected him when you could have simply walked away. You called me when you could have called authorities who would have asked dangerous questions. He paused, and Eleanor saw something complicated move behind his eyes. You saved his life, he continued. Because of you, I found him in time. The poison in his system, it was designed to weaken him until sunrise. If he had been left alone, if he had been taken to a hospital where no one understood what he was. He didn't finish the sentence, but Eleanor understood. The boy would have died. The debt I owe you cannot be measured, Lord Morganthair said. And I do not leave debts unpaid. Eleanor shook her head. I don't want anything. I just did what anyone would do. That's where you're wrong. His voice was gentle now, almost sad. Most would not have done what you did. Most would have looked the other way, or called people who would have made things worse, or simply not cared enough to kneel on cold concrete and hold a stranger's child. He reached into his coat and withdrew a card, simple white with a single number printed on it. This is my direct line, he said. If you ever need anything, protection, resources, help of any kind, you call this number. Day or night. For the rest of your life. Eleanor took the card with numb fingers. That's not necessary. It is, he said firmly. Because you've done something tonight that has consequences beyond what you realize. My enemies saw you. They know now that you helped my son. That makes you a target. Fear flickered through Eleanor's chest, but she kept her voice steady. What does that mean? It means that from this moment forward, you are under my protection. Lord Morganthair's voice carried the weight of a vow. Anyone who harms you answers to me. Anyone who threatens you faces the full power of my nation. You will never have to be afraid again. Eleanor stared at him, trying to process the impossible situation she found herself in. A few hours ago, she had been counting tips and worrying about groceries. Now she was being promised protection by a king of creatures she had thought only existed in stories. I don't understand any of this, as she admitted. You don't need to understand it tonight, he said, and his voice softened further. Tonight, you need rest. Tomorrow, someone will come to explain things more fully. But for now, know this, you are not alone anymore. Whatever struggles you faced, Whatever hardships have marked your life, they end here. Not as payment, but as recognition. You showed my son kindness when he had none to offer in return. That is not a small thing. That is everything. Eleanor felt tears prick at her eyes, and she blinked them back fiercely. She had spent so long being strong, being practical, being the one who took care of herself because there was no one else. The idea that someone, anyone, would take care of her was almost too much to bear. "Is he going to be okay?" she asked, her voice catching slightly. "Adrian?" Lord Morganthe's expression shifted, and for a moment, he wasn't a king. He was just a father, terrified for his child, grateful beyond words that his son had been found. "Because of you, yes," he said. "He will recover fully. And when he does, I suspect he will want to thank you himself. He has his mother's heart, kind and curious. He will want to know the woman who saved him." Eleanor nodded, not trusting herself to speak. Lord Morganther studied her for another moment, and then he did something unexpected. He bowed, not deeply, but with unmistakable respect. "Thank you, Eleanor Vasquez," he said, "for seeing a child instead of a mystery. For choosing compassion when it would have been easier to choose indifference. You have done my house a great honor tonight, and I will not forget it." He straightened and turned toward the cars, but paused after a few steps. "One of my people will drive you home," he said. "And tomorrow we will speak more. But tonight, please, rest. You've earned it." Eleanor watched as he walked away, his figure outlined against the headlights of the black cars. She watched as the door closed behind him, as the vehicles began to move with that same silent power. And then, just like that, the street was empty again. Eleanor stood alone under the flickering lamppost, the white card clutched in her hand, her thin jacket missing because she had given it to a boy she didn't know. She should have been terrified. She should have been overwhelmed by the impossible nature of what she had just experienced. But as she started walking home, she felt something she hadn't felt in a very long time. Hope. 3 months later, Eleanor stood in the doorway of her new apartment, a small but comfortable place in a safer neighborhood, paid for by funds she didn't have to count or worry about. She had a new job now, working at a bookshop owned by people who knew Lord Morganther but never spoke of it directly. The hours were better, the work was peaceful, and for the first time in years, she wasn't exhausted. The knock at her door was soft, almost hesitant. She opened it to find Adrian standing in the hallway, looking healthier than she had ever seen him. His color had returned, and his dark eyes were bright with nervous energy. Behind him, at a respectful distance, stood a woman who Eleanor recognized as one of Lord Morganthe's guards. "Hi," Adrian said. "I'm sorry to just show up. But I wanted to. I mean," my father said. He stopped, took a breath, and started again. "Thank you," he said simply. "For staying with me. For not leaving me alone." Eleanor smiled and stepped aside. "Would you like to come in?" I just made tea. Adrian's face lit up with a grin that made him look exactly his age, young and bright and full of possibility. I'd like that, he said. As Eleanor closed the door behind him and led him to the small kitchen table, she thought about the night that had changed everything. She thought about the cold pavement and the unconscious boy and the voice on the phone that had sounded like the end of the world. And she thought about what Lord Morgan had said, that most people would have walked away. Maybe they would have. But Eleanor had never been most people. She had been a poor waitress with $17 in tips and a thin jacket, and a heart that couldn't bear to leave a child alone in the dark. And that had been enough. Across the table, Adrian was telling her about his studies, about the books he was reading, about his father's stern but loving nature. He talked with his hands, the way children do when they're excited, and Eleanor listened with a warmth spreading through her chest. Outside, the sun was setting, casting golden light through the windows of her small apartment. And Eleanor Vasquez, who had spent so long being alone, realized that she had found something she hadn't even known she was looking for. A family. Not by blood, not by tradition, but by a single choice made on a cold night when kindness had been the only option that made sense. She poured Adrian another cup of tea and smiled as he continued his story, and somewhere in the quiet of that ordinary evening, she understood that some doors, once opened, lead to places you never want to leave. This was where she belonged now. And she had never been more grateful.